Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Hire webinar series. So for those of you that are new here, Hire is the world's largest community of TA professionals focused on the tech space. So if you're not already a member, please do sign up and join the conversation at hirehq.com. I'm Phil Blades, I'm the founder of Hire, so hello. So this webinar is sponsored by Talentful, the world's leading flexible RPO operating across the US and Europe, and working with companies such as Alphabet, Microsoft, and Atlassian. So if you're thinking about building flexibility into your talent acquisition team, then hit them up at talentful.com. So today's topic is how to keep DEI front and center when hiring at scale. The one thing that makes me really happy is that this is the highest attended webinar that we've ever done. And I think that's such a great signal that DEI is the most important thing that we do in TA. I think we hold incredible power in TA. We're the gatekeepers, we're the hunters of great jobs and talent, and we're also agents for change. If you just think about the impact of one person getting a great job on their family, the aspiration level, the pride, the economic impact, now think about that person being the first in their family or community to get a great job. It's absolutely huge. And of course, the fact that diverse companies perform much better than less diverse ones. So when hiring at speed, it may help to keep these two immutable facts in mind to ensure that DEI remains front and center. So on to the main event, and what a main event it is. So my two fantastic guests are two of the most insightful and decorated talent leaders around. I first met both Maisha and Sakina through interviewing for the Talent 100 list, of which both of them were placed on. So first of all, could you both introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'm off mute, so I'll go ahead and go first. Sakina Gardner, I am thrilled to be here today. I've been in TA for just around 15 years or so, both in agency recruiting and then actually spent most of my time in-house recruiting. Stepped away from recruiting for just a little bit at one point in my career and worked, as we would say, in the business, leading program management and operations management. But I've been in technology or technology adjacent throughout my entire career. Today, I am a VP of Talent and DEI at Numerator. We are a data and technology company providing consumer insights to most of the major brands that you all are aware of today. I am, again, thrilled to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have many time zones represented. My name is Maisha Gray Diggs, but most people call me MGD. I am one of the unicorns that came into TA. I spent the majority of my career doing recruiting as a business leader, engineer by training, and always said if I got the chance to do it full time, I would, because I had such a passion as you experience what happens after the onboarding and you're leading teams, that I wanted to really impact top of funnel and at the beginning of the process. So I came over, as some say, to the dark side, to TA after kind of moonlighting in TA as kind of my organizational contribution, and have been at Microsoft and Twitter, and I'm now at Eventbrite leading our global talent acquisition, our inclusion and experience teams. So lots of fun with that career change. So thank you for having me, Phil, and excited to be here with you too, Sakina.
Great, I'm so excited to get going. Right, so the first thing we wanted to talk about is about how do we set up a diversity hiring strategy that is fit for scale? Maybe Sakina, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, having an operations management background, I tend to sort of think about things related to process. And so, building a diversity strategy and thinking about speed, velocity, right, and volume. I think about it in define, align, and refine. So those are sort of how I approach it. As it relates to define, it's understanding how your organization views diversity, right? What does diversity mean for your organization? What does progress look like? And really understanding and defining what that is. Once you know what that is, and so to boil that down, it's who's in the organization and who's underrepresented in the organization. Aligning on how you're going to go about that. So is that a 2-year plan? Is that a 3-year plan? Is it focusing on core aspects of the employee life cycle? Like rallying and aligning the organization around what that looks like. Alignment is incredibly important. And that we talk a lot about, alignment being, core at the executive level. But, what I will say to you here today is it's important that you have alignment from the very top of the organization on down to, the folks who are, referring individuals to opportunities at your company, right? So core alignment. So you've defined what it is that you need to go after. You've aligned as an organization that is the right thing to do, which includes the why. So Phil, thank you for referring to that earlier. And then once you've put that into place, it's refining on, how do we need to adjust our recruitment process, the how we go to market, where our employment brand lives, how we've defined our employment brand, right, is incredibly important. But then really looking at refining your process every single step of the way from the top of the funnel of who's coming in from an attraction perspective, all the way to how we're assessing them as a part of the process, reducing bias. So I think of it in those three ways, and it really is aligning on what that is and then going and executing. And then there's that ongoing cycle of, okay, how was this working for us? And how do we need to go back and refine that to do better or faster?
Right.
I think the piece that I would add, I love the define, align, refine. It gives people focus, is that helping people remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think so many times people want to put a strategy in place and want to see instant results, right? And the talent is there, right? It's not as much as about the talent not being there. So I think we've done a lot of work to debunk the myth that there isn't a pool of diverse talent. I think you have to be patient, right? Steady wins the race, because diverse talent is also doing their own define, align, and refine process on companies, right? To make sure that this is the right fit for them. And so when you rush through this, people feel it, candidates feel it. So that's the encouragement I would get, is that you got to be in it for the long haul. This is not something you can turn on for, hey, we have these 10 roles we want to fill. Hey, we want to do this for a year. That you really have to invest the time, because this is an iterative process that Sakina talked about, is that it's steady wins the race.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, we have got a question here, which I think it's sort of aligned really, but Jarvis Jones here has asked, what does DEI mean and what does progress look like? Is that something that, it's quite a big question, but is that something we can weave into this answer here?
It is a big question. So DEI, to just boil it down, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is really that, like the definition of a variety of people, right? And so ensuring that when you look across your organization, there is a good mix of perspectives, of cultures, of ways of operating, is critically important.
Mm-hmm.
The inclusion piece of that, and so I'll sort of, go to the inclusion, is ensuring that we are truly an organization where individuals are welcome, right? So it's one thing to define diversity and what that means. It's another thing for individuals to come in the organization and feel as though they are included and it is a place for them. The equity piece is a big one. That is understanding that not everyone starts at the same place. Not everyone is afforded the same opportunities. And so when we're implementing these approaches to ensure that, we're moving our organizations forward to increase diversity, to become more inclusive, it's critically important that we're also mindful of the differences in individuals' needs. That's a broad topic. We could certainly probably spend a whole hour on just that. But it's important to be mindful of that as a part of your DEI strategy.
Mm-hmm.
From what progress looks like, that's going to vary by organization. As MGD said, it's you've got to look at where you are and make that assessment authentically to say, this is something that maybe we can do fast, but can we do it right? In recruiting, we can certainly, look at early career recruiting and campus recruiting and make significant progress from a diversity perspective. But where we find ourselves getting into trouble is, we make progress from a numbers, and this work is never about numbers. We make progress and we bring individuals into the organization, and they get here and they look around and they say, one, I don't belong here. There's nothing here that I feel connected to. And there's no one here who looks like me. So looking at senior level, so what's the path for me? And they leave. And so it's important that when we are deploying these strategies and approaches, that we're thinking about it from a broad sense of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you two, Jarvis, think about progress, Sakina hit that organizations are at different places, right? So there are organizations that are very early in this process that actually getting diverse bodies in the door, diverse talent, that's a success measure for them because they haven't won that race. They haven't done that well. And then for others, the success is to retain them, right? So other organizations are really focused on the retention piece. And I'd argue that we should all be focused there first to make sure that the environment is inclusive when we bring people in. I think as a diverse talent leader, it pains me when people leave, but it really pains me when diverse talent leaves because I know how hard it was to get them in. There are organizations that all of us should be focused on retention, but there are those that are like, we have the numbers coming in, we have the steady pipeline. We're really focused on how to retain them. And then there are other more mature organizations in this journey that are really focused, as Sakina talked about, on advancement, both on the internal talent that they have, but also on bringing in leaders so that you see that mirror, so that people see that role model and believe, hey, I can be the VP of sales. Hey, I can be the chief communications officer at this company because I see it. I can believe it. So I think it's a hard question to answer about what success looks like because every company will give you a different definition, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we touch on that sort of diverse leadership hiring. Like, are there any sort of top tips for companies when they want to, they know that they need diverse leaders, how do you get ready for that to happen? How do you know that you're ready for that to happen? And how do you bring in great people and retain them, of course?
Yeah, diverse leadership is a whole sermon and conversation. I think when you know that you need diverse leaders, it's already probably late, right? Because that is a 18-month to 2-year relationship building, a courtship. I mean, it is like a Match.com on to the exponential, right? You're going to have a lot of touch points. Diverse candidates, especially at the leadership level, and most leaders are anchored in something. They have a lot more roots in places. It's a little harder to move them already, but I think it's a lot when you ask a diverse leader to come in and be the one. There's a loneliness in being that only one. And so while we want to make sure that we retain talent at all levels, I think we really have to do the work to make sure the organization is ready for a diverse leader. So there's going to be time. You've got to invest the time because that leader is really going to want to know who you are as the leader I'm going to work for, who you are as the organization I'm going to work for, and really get into the DNA.
The one thing I'd say to that is it's important to understand and be really clear with that leader coming into the organization of what is needed from them and the role that you're looking for them to play. When you go to market for a leadership role, it is important that you are absolutely committed to building a diverse slate before making a decision. And so getting that commitment is key. So even when you're behind the scenes, and absolutely, it's so much better when you're having conversation about what the leadership organization will look like in the next year, right? And you can start to pipeline, start to build those relationships. But when you've said, hey, we have an opening, we've got to go to market, we've got to bring someone in at the senior director, VP, C-level. You've got to get alignment across the board on what that candidate slate should look like, but then also be mindful of, as I said earlier, from an equity perspective, there are some levels, some experiences, some industries that just simply aren't as diverse. And so looking at that from a requirements perspective, it pains me when we start to talk about what the requirements for the role are. The person has to have this, right? Because the longer that list is, the more you're narrowing your opportunity to build that really strong, diverse slate. And so, one thing that I would add there is talking to your leadership team around what impact looks like. Right. So we need this person to come in to be a VP of sales, or we need this person to come in to be a C-level of name your function. Great. What is it that we need them to do in the next 6, 12, 18 months? And how can we partner to assess and align on that through the assessment process and to really dig into what that looks like? Because when you go to market with that long list of requirements, you really are setting yourself up to hire more of exactly what you have in the organization today.
Mm-hmm. Should we take Cody's question here? So what challenges are employers facing after the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action? What are a few things they should do to keep moving forward with their DEI hiring efforts? I mean, very relevant, but tough thing.
Cody, I know you well, and you are a leader in this space as well. So you know that affirmative action reversal, the Supreme Court decision, was a cause for pause. I mean, if you think about the 3 years before for DEI professionals, it felt good. It felt very much like a feast. We were getting all the things that we needed, not just in hiring, but also in the programming space. It was plentiful and bountiful. And I think that the Supreme Court decision was that people have paused. I mean, you saw how quickly DEI commitments came down off websites. People just didn't know what was going to happen to them. And I think we're in this place of there are kind of flight. There are companies that are doing that, taking DEI off their website, taking, just not knowing. And then there are those that are fighting, right, that are staying the course, that have seen kind of the pendulum swing back and forth many of times, but it's so ingrained in their DNA, they're not running from it. So I think we're seeing both responses. And I think again, I could tell you, if your company is going to support you and not use those scary legal words like this is high risk, people are moving forward, right? I would say we haven't changed much about what we've done at Eventbrite. We're just mindful that, yes, this decision happened. We want to have the conversations, but we're not going to stop having a diverse slate, because it doesn't mean that we're not hiring non-diverse talent. It just means that we're leveling the playing field. So I think it goes back a bit to where your company stands and their risk tolerance.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add on that, Sakina?
Yeah, more that I would agree with that. Thankfully, our approach across hiring has largely not been focused on the hiring decision, right? It's really that top of funnel and ensuring that we are recruiting and our sources of talent allow us to reach diverse talent. And so, we've got to stay close to just how things progress. There's, litigation and things that are happening. We've got to stay close to that to just ensure that we're mindful of that and we learn from what's happening out there. But, we're staying the course. We're focused on ensuring that we're attracting diverse talent. We're, working to remove bias from our interview process. And when I say we, I mean across the TA space and those who are focused on this. We're doing the right things in the right way. And that's what matters most.
Right. So moving on to the second question that I wanted to talk about. So how do you build a TA team that can support future diversity hiring strategies?
I can jump in there. It starts with buy-in. And so it's that going to that alignment, right? It's important that your TA folks understand what's needed, right? And so as a TA function, we are aligned to the strategic mission of the organization and going out and identifying talent that is going to help us get there. Diversity is one key and critical component of that. And it's important that each and every single recruiter on the team understands that, believes that, and is behind that. So that's that alignment piece. The other thing that I would say is it's important for our recruiters to be invested in what's happening in the organization. And so whether your recruiting function is diverse or, what that looks like, right? It's our goal for all functions to be diverse. But it's important that when they're talking to talent in the marketplace, they're able to represent what that experience looks like. Now, they're going to live it differently, right? But they should be able to speak to what the organization is doing to grow and retain diverse talent. Where there are opportunities for diverse talent to plug in and feel connected and be a part of a community and build a community. But then also, as I mentioned earlier, just like at the senior levels, right? It's helping folks who are coming in understand where we are on that journey, right? It's important that we don't misrepresent that. And so that they know, when they come into the organization, exactly what it is that sort of life in the organization would look like for them. I think it's important that the recruiters are ensuring that the interview panels are as diverse as possible, not forced, right? We don't want to bring, Sarah from, the copy machine over and put her on the interview panel because she's, an Asian female, right? We want to make sure that we are mindful of this, but giving talent the opportunity to really see themselves as they come through the process where it makes sense.
I think my build to that would be the same way that the hiring managers need to be intentional about diversifying their organization. I stand by not just TA, but HR needs to be in a better place. Or if you call it your people team, however your organization refers to it, I find it odd. I think that's the right word, odd, that the team responsible for people tends to be the least diverse in most organizations. So I say that again. I want TA to be diverse, but I think everybody who's interacting with people, I think HR has a higher expectation from me that organization is diverse, because so much of the work that the broader HR organization does touches the pieces that Sakina talked about, right? They touch the hiring piece, they touch the inclusion piece when you get there, the experience that you have. I mean, so much. And so, I push to have diverse HR organizations, which means I want our TA organization to be diverse for all the reasons that Sakina talked about. Again, for me, candidates are evaluating you and your company just like we are evaluating them, and they see it. I mean, they are taking note of who they're experiencing, what the experience is, who can answer questions. I mean, wholeheartedly, genuinely, versus, oh, I read this on the website. They're giving me the stuff they put on the website. I think I just ask people to think about that two-way evaluation in the interview process. I think sometimes people forget that it is a two-way thing, and candidates are watching and evaluating what that experience looks like, because it mirrors what's going to happen when they get there. It really, really does.
Yeah. This question here, which I think is kind of relevant here, thinking about more from the hiring manager interface side, which the recruiters having interface with the hiring managers. How can we get alignment with hiring managers that maybe aren't willing or aren't showing the sort of patience needed to build a diverse slate? Any ideas there?
One conversation that I've found successful is highlighting the value of culture add versus culture fit. And I'm sure many of us are familiar with that. But really showing that sort of visual framework. There's something that I found, I think it was Great Places to Work, posted something, and there's an actual visual that shows, the makeup of a team. And if you look at another set of candidates, one who brings something different perspectives, different capabilities, how it actually strengthens and broadens the capabilities of the entire function. And so I found that to be successful in terms of getting buy-in from managers to just think differently about talent. Like I said earlier, if we go to market and we're looking for, an exact replica of the person who was in the role, how are you really advancing your function? How are you really moving us forward? And so thinking bigger about that. Now I say that, and then I'm not going to paint the picture that it's easy, right? Because I've talked to managers and they're like, no, literally, Sakina, I just need someone tomorrow. Like, can you, but having that conversation, and I think we said it earlier, the sooner you get in front of what talent looks like, what those shifts are, what that growth pattern looks like, it allows you to get in front of that effort a little bit more, because at the point that you're reacting to it, it really does become an uphill battle. But that culture add versus culture fit, and just really shifting how leaders and managers are thinking about what good talent looks like on their team has been really impactful for me.
Yeah, I think the piece I would add is I challenge hiring managers to check their brand ambassador status, right? I think it's really easy to call up your TA team and say, hey, I need this thing, A, B, C, D, E, but they can't go get it, right? And I really do want our hiring managers to be very active in the process. And so I want them to be posting and going out to get the talent. And I think they understand that and get to see how hard that speed versus quality versus diversity versus all the things that they've over required in this job description, how hard it is to find that unicorn. I think it's really easy for them to push on and hide behind their recruiting team. And so we have a brand ambassador guide. We have laid out 30, 60, 90 days, what we expect to see from you as a new leader. We actually have done the training. So no one can interview at Eventbrite that hasn't done some inclusion training and thinking about the bias that happens in hiring. I think people don't see it all the time, again, because there's this kind of power dynamic. We have the job, the candidate needs to come through this gate. I think I saw someone talk about the gates in the hiring process. And so we have a 1-hour training with them to kind of break that down, because it really is not about we have the power, we have the jobs, you got to come through us. It really is about finding that ad, who's going to make us better, who can bring something that we don't have. And so I think it's a mindset shift as well. The less transactional you can make that interaction with your hiring managers, I think the better. They will understand that you just aren't throwing profiles over the wall at them and they're saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So I encourage you as much as you can and your organization allows to get your hiring managers to be active. Just because you have a role open doesn't make you an active hiring manager.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thinking about how to weave some of these questions in here, because there's some really good questions. I'm not sure they're completely relevant to what we're talking about right now. But one of the things that I suppose I'll ask before I move on to retention is, how do you sort of create sort of talent magnetism for, I suppose in this case, great diverse talent coming to an organization? Very big question, I know. But are there some top tips that we can give to people to say, how do we make ourselves attractive as a company to the people that we want to hire?
The employment brand, not to overly simplify it, but understanding who you are as an employer and asking yourself, why does the talent that I want to work here, why would they want to work here? And actually sharing that out. I mean, that is key. And it doesn't have to be a robust sort of employment brand strategy and where, advertising on, Google or what have you. But, knowing what the reality is internally and sharing that authentically externally is incredibly important. It starts there for me, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm smiling a bit because we can tell you we are anything that we want, right? We can make all the great ads about whatever company A, B, C, D is. And I've just embraced, and there's someone on my team that monthly will pull the Glassdoor and Blind. I can't go. It does give me a little PTSD. It's a lot because that's where you get the really real, right? Like culture surveys internally are one. I think depending on the level of trust and comfort in your organization, you can get some data there that will tell you, hey, is my employment brand is really as strong as I think it is? What are employees saying? Because it really needs to match. Like I can say I'm X, but I have to deliver. And Y needs to match. But when you go to Blind and Glassdoor, you learn so much about what is really happening to really refine. One of the things that is important to me and for our team is that we are true and honest with candidates. And I think we hear that feedback that, we will give you the good, the bad, and the ugly because we want you to make an informed decision. And I think that has been a hallmark of just kind of my go-to-market strategy wherever I've been is that, I don't want to tell candidates half truths. I don't want my team to. I want you to give them an answer. One, it'll be from the I perspective, but then they'll go get other data points through those sites. So be as honest as you can about who we are, our shortcomings. All organizations have them. And then candidates will make the best decision for them.
Yeah, Yeah. Kind of leads perfectly onto the third question, really, which is about retention. I mean, ultimately, people stay in organizations where they arrive on the first day and they think, well, this is what I thought it was going to be. These are the good, bad, and the ugly. So what can we do to build an inclusive environment for diverse employees to aid retention of this great talent?
I remember when I joined Numerator, one of the things that I shared with our employees was that the last thing we want to do is build a leaky bucket or create a leaky bucket situation, right? Well, we're working hard, we're filling the bucket with water, but the structure, right, is compromised such that we're leaking talent. And so that inclusion piece, the work internally, is important. You know, when individuals are in the organization, regardless of how they identify, it's important that they feel connected, they feel engaged, and they believe that it's a place where they can grow and thrive. And typically, all of those things are true when they can see it, right? And so, your engagement programs, like how you're connecting people, especially in this remote hybrid-ish world that we're in, like we've got to be really, really intentional about how we're connecting and keeping people connected to their peers cross-functionally, and just even the excitement and the energy of the brand. How we're growing talent is important. If you have mentorship programs, if you have leadership development programs, and you aren't looking at, who's participating and who isn't, like that's a good place to start. We've got to make sure that we're developing our talent. Sponsorship programs are incredibly impactful, but it really does start there. We talk about ERGs. That's another place where, individuals can start to really build a sense of community. When we walk into a room, it is human nature for us to immediately look for a way to connect with someone who looks like us or in some way is like us. And so if you haven't established that within your organizations, and I know we're talking TA here, but really looking broadly, across the leaders of the organization, if you don't have these programs in place where people on a regular basis can see and connect with people who look like them or identify like they do, you're setting yourself up for a place in which people may start to feel disconnected or a lack of engagement. So that piece is important. So, and the way that we look at it is the grow and retain, right? Because if you're growing people, you're keeping them engaged, it does increase the likelihood of your ability to retain them. My last call out here around that is, there's a huge focus, and we talked about this a little earlier around the early career strategy, right? When in 2020 and 2021, when we started talking about and making these big lofty commitments around increasing diversity in organizations, the HBCUs were just overwhelmed, right? Like folks were going there, they were showing up, they were giving, sponsoring events, and there was a huge focus there. But what we're seeing, and there was a study put out by, I think it was Russell Reynolds in the last year or so, talent is close to 50% of talent, especially at the more junior levels, are leaving organizations in 2 years because they aren't seeing where they can grow. Like they're coming in and they're grateful for the opportunity, I'm sure. But when they're looking for that next thing and when they're looking for that place where they belong, it just isn't there. And so there's a lot of movement. So we've got to be focused, not just early career, but we've got to be looking across all of our levels and making sure that we're making efforts there. Because when I see someone, and I think we talked about it earlier, when I see someone who's, a senior leader in the function that I am looking to grow my career in, I'm motivated by that and I'm committed by that. And so it's a big thing to talk about in terms of retention. There's not one sort of answer that's going to solve it, but we've really got to look across the employee life cycle at what are the actions that we're taking to ensure that people believe and are seeing that they can grow and thrive here.
Yeah, I would make a shameless plug for your diverse leaders. I know we talked about that earlier. Diverse leaders are doing so much behind the scenes. It's the below the line stuff that isn't in a job description to check in on talent as they're coming in through the door. we, and in my position of seeing who all is coming in, I'm making those connections for folks. Hey, leader X, I need you to reach out to this person because here's the connection. Let me seed you with why I'm connecting you to and why I want them quickly to feel in the house. And I think we have to be doing that, right? We have to be intentional about how the contributions that diverse leaders are making to get the folks feeling in the house quickly. And I think, and I don't underscore enough the role that our ERGs play. We utilize them very heavily for inclusion, sometimes too much. Sometimes organizations put a lot on, typically who are the most junior folks in the organization that aren't really the decision makers. And so, again, making sure that we treat our employee resource group leaders and those groups as precious assets, because they shouldn't alone be the inclusion vehicle at your organization. If that is where you are sending people to fill in the house, your organization has some more work to do, because that's a part, but there needs to be other things that we're doing. So that's just me trying to take care of those ERG leaders, because I know, again, that's for folks who have day jobs. They're doing that as a labor of love off the side of their desk. And I don't think organizations value what that is and what that brings to them enough.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things, one of the hardest challenges, I suppose, out here is that to try and, if you're a really large organization, enterprise organization, trying to turn the tank around on these kind of solutions is very, very difficult. But if there is, let's say, as a new CEO come into an enterprise business that really, truly believes that building a diverse team is the thing to do, are there any sort of tips if you're a TA leader out there? Like, what are the things that we can do practically to support that really good intention coming from the C-suite?
I think in an enterprise organization, it's probably scarier to do this work because they tend to be very focused on the numbers. And if you do the math, if you've got your good data analysts and your statisticians, you're like, it's going to take a whole lot to have a little bit of an impact because of, where we are in the journey. So I know I saw someone in the chat talking about being at a startup. Yeah. I think you at the startups have the best opportunity to really impact this before you become 100,000 person company. These startups, these big companies started somewhere. They were 5, 10, 40, 50, 100 person companies. But I think in the enterprise space, you've got to chunk it out. Like, we can't solve the whole company. I mean, it may be, we preferentially are going to think about a certain business unit, a certain skill set. We can change the game in our PM space. But I think you've got to chunk it out. I think sometimes when you try to boil the ocean, it really gets scary. And then you get moved to do nothing, right? So that would be my advice for enterprise leaders, is that we have to be strategic and intentional about where and not boil the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And, it goes back to defining what that looks like or what goals look like. Data is a huge piece. Anytime you're pulling data on, employee demographics, of course, there's, differences by country, right? And where you are, you've got to be mindful of. When you pull the data, what you uncover, you've got to do something with it, right? So there's that piece too. But it really does help you define what the needs are. And so having the conversation with that leader around, this is what today looks like. What is it? Where is it that we want to make an impact? And how quickly do we want to make an impact? Because that's going to determine the resources that we put behind it. Right. So we can't say we want to make a huge shift in the organization in a year with one DEI person. Right. It's just not going to happen. And to the earlier point around the ERG leaders, like, they aren't going to solve it for us. They shouldn't solve it for us. Right. And so having that realistic conversation about that is important. I look at it two ways. There's and again, my process, right? There's sort of two tracks. There's the hearts and minds, right? Where we really talk about the value of the work, the impact on the organization, what feels good about increasing diversity at a company, being a more inclusive company, and how we all benefit from that, right? This is not just the folks who are underrepresented, they get more opportunities. And that's not what this is about. It's about growing the entire organization and creating an environment where there's true equity across every single individual who's in the organization. We truly all thrive. So there's a hearts and minds piece. But then there's the sort of programmatic piece, which is, for me, the process and how we're setting up our recruitment process, everything from, again, how we go to market, how we're talking about the work that we're doing, how we're controlling and mitigating for bias within our assessment processes, and then how we're looking at those developmental programs, how we're looking at engagement across various demographic groups. Like, we've got to be looking at that stuff. Again, once you start digging into data and you get some insights, you've got to do something about that. But then having that conversation with the executive leader to say, listen, this is where we are, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And how we address this is going to, or how we want to address this is going to determine the resources that we put behind it.
Great. I think MGD, you touched on Dina here, who is a senior robotics engineer, but in this TA chat, which is really fascinating, though, in a company that are pre-talent team, already trying to put those initiatives in place. So absolutely hats off to you, Dina. That's a job and a half, I'm sure, to do those two jobs. I mean, are there any sort of tips that we could give to someone really at this really nascent stage of diversity and inclusion strategies? To what can we put in place really early and stamp our mark on a company to make sure that it does actually grow in a really diverse way?
I think we all like to get wins. And so I think if I had to think about starting from scratch, it'd be being realistic about where we can see the progress. I think if you pick something, let's say like AI ML, we already know is not very diverse. And if that becomes the where we set our sights initially, we may not keep the course because it was hard. I think there are some spaces where if you already aren't showing the diversity in spaces that we know from the total addressable market is uber diverse, then that's where you should start, right? Like, we know we should be able to find Black lawyers. So if you don't have a Black or brown lawyer, then that's a great place to start if you're hiring lawyers, right? I think just, again, being intentional about where you get that win, because that keeps people engaged. I think we naturally hire a lot of type A people, but we see it even with kids on the soccer field. They want to win. They want to score that goal and that excitement. And so I think setting that realistic first goal of where to start this work helps you get that win so you keep, you stay the course.
Brilliant. Anything to add there, Sakina?
No, I agree. I think, MGD, you said it earlier, you can't boil the ocean, right? And so laser focusing on, where can we make some early wins, that low hanging fruit, as you'll hear us talk about in corporate America. Go after that, celebrate that success. And again, going back to, scalability, it's now you stand that up, like you feel good about where that is, and that is sort of an engine that's running before you move on to the next thing.
Brilliant. Right. Is there anything else we didn't cover? I think I was looking back through the notes. I think we've covered pretty much what we set out to do. So thank you all for coming to this webinar. Thanks everyone for being really active in the chat as well. It's always great when people asking questions as we go through. It really develops the conversation. It really sort of steers us in a direction that what people are really thinking as we're talking. So thank you all for that. Thank you to both of my guests. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you both. I'm really, really I learned loads and it was fantastic. So so there'll be a next webinar next week on Wednesday, same time, same place. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.